Alrighty. So, to improve investment, to improve capital goods, we have to improve investment. So we need to do things that will encourage people to save more money or to consume less, which will result in them saving more money. It's one or the other. You can consume some and save some, but that decreases how much you'll be able to consume in the future. You can consume a lot and save very little, which means you'll be able to consume less in the future. You have to keep increasing your stock of K to keep increasing your ability to consume, because your K has a huge impact upon your productivity. Right. We're going to talk about saving and investment a lot in chapter 26. It's pretty much what the whole chapter is about. So ultimately what we get is a trade-off between do we consume now or do we consume later. It's that delayed gratification thing that we were kind of getting at a couple days ago. The government can, through public policy, put in place policies that encourage saving and investment. Okay? The K goes up, causing increased productivity and improved standard of living. This is a long process. It does not happen overnight by any means. When you get a lot of saving in a short period of time, you do get some relatively quick bumps, because there is incentive in the banking industry to get that money back out in the form of loans, which fuel the investment. The problem with that is that these things, they end up running in little cycles, and it's not slow, steady growth. You get little jumps and starts, and it always slows back down. The more K you get, there is a certain point at which adding even more K doesn't do you much good. Let's go back to digging the pool in the backyard. We have Lauren and Afira, right? I've got them both a shovel, okay? They've got K. I just have these two labor sources, but I invest and I purchase another shovel. I have now added more capital goods to my labor pool. Am I necessarily better off?
No, because there's only two people who use it.
Right, so I have diminishing returns to capital going on here. Guys, I would really appreciate it if you take the earbuds out. Okay. At a certain point, having more equipment doesn't do you any good, because you got to have people who can use it, who are trained to use it, etc. What are you laughing about, Dave?
One of the things that I found out, but I didn't even hear you because I went. Oh.
All right. So here's what this production function looks like when we graph it. We have our output per worker versus our capital per worker. You can tremendously increase your output per worker for a little bit of increase of capital early on, right? Little bit of capital increase, huge output increase.
Is that like them going from no shovel to like one shovel?
Right. As you're increasing your capital, how much does your output increase? So over here, where we're increasing capital, you got to increase capital a lot to get even a little bit of increase in productivity.
What's the Y?
GDP, productivity.
And the K is your capital.
So you can see that the increase in K results in a greater ratio of increase to productivity. But when you get out there where there's already a lot of capital goods, if you give them even more, doesn't necessarily increase your productivity even as much as you increase capital goods. Pretty stark illustration, isn't it? So this is what a diminishing returns to capital curve looks like. It will be on your quiz and it will very likely be on the AP exam. All right. Now, if you are in a situation where you don't have many capital goods, you get a lot of gain from very little investment. We call this the catch-up effect. This is what happens in those third world nations. If we put some capital goods down in Mali, you're going to see some significant productivity growth in Mali, where they don't have capital goods. You put the same amount of capital goods down in the UK, meh. So a poor country is going to start down there in the corner, increase their capital goods the same amount, and look at the differences in how much their productivity increases. It's pretty stark difference. Yeah?
And why don't countries invest in poor countries?
Why don't wealthy countries invest in poorer countries?
Is it
It
because-
has a lot to do with being able to secure that return on your investment. If the government is corrupt, like in Zimbabwe, I could spend the money to build that factory, but am I sure that the equipment that I'm buying for the factory will ever actually get there? How much more will I have to invest in bribery, in protection and private protection, if property rights aren't secured because the government's unstable, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. But it's a good, fair question. Because it would be an advantage to wealthy countries to improve poor countries, because then that makes them markets for the wealthy countries' exports. You're just creating new consumers by enriching them. Okay. This is post-Korean War. So for 30 years after the Korean War, both the US and South Korea put about the same amount of money into investment as a portion of their GDP. So if you didn't understand diminishing returns to capital, you'd think equal improvement in productivity, right? But the US already had a lot of capital. South Korea's capital had been bombed into dust. So they get a tremendous amount of increased productivity compared to the United States. Your question about investment from abroad. The government can also encourage foreign investment. And there are a few different types of foreign investment. You can get foreign direct investment. And these are definitions you just need to straight up learn. I'll let you copy it down before I waste my breath explaining it. We have a few examples of foreign direct investment here in the United States, and you wouldn't think, why are foreign countries investing in the United States? Well, because we have all the advantages of stable government, property rights protection, et cetera, et cetera. You're pretty sure that you're going to get the return on your investment when you invest here. It may not grow as exponentially quickly as it would in a poorer country, but it's not risky. Give me an example of foreign direct investment.
BP.
What?
BP.
BP, Volkswagen, IKEA, Toyota, Honda, okay? And we gotta be careful. IKEA, I'm not sure how their stores are run in the US, if IKEA actually owns them or if they're a franchise sort of situation. So let's take, for instance, a BP oil platform, owned by BP. BP stands for what, guys? British Petroleum, okay? So they own that oil platform in the US. Okay? They own it, they operate it. Okay? They are the foreign entity operating in the United States. If McDonald's Corporation or Walmart Corporation goes and opens a store in China, that is foreign direct investment. They're owning it. That is different than when you have foreign portfolio investment. So I'll let you get this definition down and explain it to you. It's really easy to tell who's read and taken notes when I'm lecturing, because this would be the kind of thing you should have written down from the reading. All right, so foreign portfolio investment is kind of like a mutual fund. A bunch of foreign investors put their money together and they go to this foreign country and they say, okay, here we've got some money, we want some return on our investment, do with it what you need to do with it. And they give a portfolio manager or an investment manager in that country the opportunity to use their money how they see fit in exchange for a return. Okay? So the foreign investors aren't directly saying, this is what I want done with my money, this is how I want it run. They're saying, here you go, send back the profits. Okay? Can you see different advantages here? Which one's better for a foreign nation?
Foreign portfolio.
Yeah. Because with the portfolio investment, the nation gets to decide what's going to benefit it as well as the investors. With the direct investment, it's all about what's benefiting the investors.
What's like an example of
If I own shares in a mutual fund that specializes in travel, and that travel group goes and says to Malaysia, hey, we think tourism is going to take off. We'd like to see you maybe build some hotels. We're going to give you some money to build some hotels. And they do that. Then the Malaysians decide what cities the hotels go in, how big they should be, et cetera, as opposed to, say, Hilton going over and saying, we want that property right there and this is what we're going to put on it.
is portfolio overly popular? Because I feel like that's a lot of leeway.
I don't know the answer to that. Portfolio investment is actually easier because I can be part of a foreign portfolio investment, but I can't do foreign direct investment. I can pool my money as part of the portfolio. Yeah.
I just Googled it, and it says that anytime like a country were to establish like a manufacturing business, any of that would be direct investment. And it's like fiscal amounts is the portfolio, like if they invest in our market or assets.
They invest in our assets, like if they come in and they buy mines and
Yeah, it refers to investing in assets such as stocks or bonds in a foreign country.
Is that like if they were to buy something, like a mine there, and then you'd mine it and send them back the profits that you're making from it?
yeah, or if you go and you buy French stocks in France's market. That's what he's saying.
For the interchangeable problems, I want to ask you, suppose that an auto company owned entirely by German citizens opens a new factory in South Carolina. which one would that be? 'Cause it doesn't really mention
That's foreign direct investment.
direct.
Yeah.
So when it says or owned entirely, that's basically saying operating it too.
Something doesn't mention owned entirely, can we assume that it's a portfolio?
Probably. Probably. Alright. So, investment from abroad really helps poorer nations because that's money they didn't have. That's wealth they couldn't have aggregated to use for investment. And even though some of those profits are going to go back to the countries where that money came from, the overall good is being done in that country. How many of you remember taking World Civ and the chapter on imperialism in Africa? Right? And all of the different ways in which those nations rebelled and eventually became independent. And one of the things that the Western powers that be that write the curriculum tell you is that despite the fact that these nations in Africa had been subjugated and had had their resources stripped from them, etc., the Western powers left some good stuff behind because they built schools and roads and hospitals and infrastructure. And isn't that swell? Well, from a purely economic standpoint, yeah, that's kind of swell. That was foreign direct investment to put in rail lines and roads and build ports and hospitals and schools. That was creating capital stock for those nations that they wouldn't have had the ability to do on themselves, on their own. Now, whether or not you view that as actually swell in the humane sense, in the social sense, that's a separate issue. But from an economic point of view, it did give advantage to those regions of Africa that had been colonized and developed in that way. For instance, take a look at Mali versus South Africa. Who has the better economy today? Who was more directly invested, etc., etc. Now, there's 50, 60, 70 years of history in between there that factors into that, but at the same time, the French didn't put nearly as much investment into Mali as the British did into South Africa. All right, education. You can improve your productivity by educating your citizens. Invest in that human capital. Offer public schools, free public education. Offer subsidized loans for college. What does subsidized loans for college, what's that mean? Low interest loans secured by the government. Okay. Some nations offer grants. Some nations even provide free college education or university education, depending upon where you are in the world and what they call their different levels of education. Here's a pretty stunning number. That becomes a lot of money. What's that 10% increase become after 4 years of college? Because it's not 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%.
Your skills.
It's factorial, right? Davis is doing that. It's a lot of money. So when a kid says, I'm dropping out, I'm going to get my GED so I can start working now, I need that money, I'll earn so much more than everybody who's still stuck here in school, stupid fools, and you possess this knowledge, makes it hard to...
And yet this is a higher class.
What?
But then isn't there people that graduate college and like they just don't like they do something else?
Oh, are there people who don't manage this? Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of trade workers can like make rules.
True, but that's schooling.
Oh, that's true.
Trade work is schooling, that's training, that's education.
I And then don't you, after your 2
A
years,
plumber
you
makes
still
way more
train?
than I make, for sure.
$50.
But that plumber's apprenticeship and training,
Doesn't that count as education?
Yeah.
Okay. Even though if they're not in college?
$50 an hour, that's what a master plumber makes.
there is a cost. You are giving up what you could earn now to earn more later.
Is that kind of like
Yeah.
our consume now, spend later, save?
It's that trade-off. It's the same trade-off. Invest now to earn later. Invest now to consume later. Right? Consume less while you're in college so you can spend the money on college so that you can earn more to spend more later. I once had a student who came back to me a few years after he graduated from college and he said, you know what? The entirety of my schooling in economics could be summed up in 2 words. I thought for a minute and I'm like, what 2 words? And he said opportunity cost. And we debated for quite a while. He's actually a major down in the Armored Artillery in Texas right now. We debated for quite a while about it. He actually convinced me that just about everything we learn about in here can be at its root boiled down to opportunity cost. You're making a choice. Improve people's health and nutrition. A healthier worker is more productive. We're in the middle of flu season, right? A number of you have missed school. Some of you haven't. Those of you who haven't, how many of you have been here when you didn't feel 100%? Are you as productive? Do you get as much out of it? You don't put as much into it. None of us do, right? Okay. So imagine you were underfed. Maybe not to the point of malnourishment, but underfed. Do you get as much out of it? That's why it's important for us to offer free and reduced breakfast and lunch to students. Because if they're not physically prepared for the day, they can't mentally get as much out of it. They may complete those years of schooling, but they're not going to get the 10%. Okay. Does anybody know what the number 1 key to health and long life is in terms of healthcare?
Your teeth.
Your teeth. Poor dental care is the number 1 indicator of a diminished life expectancy. Because if your teeth aren't intact and solid and secure, you can't consume the nourishment that you need to sustain your life, and you can't consume the variety of nourishing foods that you need. So, dental care needs to be a primary concern for a nation. Yes, sir.
The UK not have dental care.
They do have dental care.
Well,
It's
not
just
to
it's kind of a meme that they have bad dental care. It's a societal thing. They provide dental care. Okay. If you have a nation where people are significantly underfed, just increasing their daily caloric intake improves their productivity exponentially.
Would that be like the
Feeding them at work or providing them with more pay or subsidized stores to shop in. Yeah. Henry Ford figured out, and lots of the Lowell factory plants in the Industrial Revolution figured out that their workers were far more productive when they were provided housing, because it meant that they had a clean, dry, safe place to sleep. Now they charged them for that housing, but it was subsidized. They were on time to work. They were at work every day. They were absent of far less. They worked the entire time. Right? It made them much more productive.
Wait, so could you argue that child labor isn't as productive as having a few adults?
Could you argue that child labor isn't as productive as having a few adults? Well, child labor is going to lack the human capital that adults would have, but if it's completely unskilled manual labor, that's not going to matter. Child fingers have been proved to be more nimble at some tasks than others. But in the end, it's an opportunity cost. It's a trade-off again. Do you want to use those children up now as laborers, or do you want to educate them and make them more productive as adult laborers later? It's the same
That was
debate.
in our book.
Hmm?
That was, God, I sound like such a nerd.
That was
That
in your
our
book?
It was an example of a little.
You read a colored text box.
Stop. And it was interesting. Okay, so like one of the little kids, the dad told him so she interviewed the family and like they sent all the kids and the government subsidized like very little bit of pay for the kids to be going to school instead of for them to work so that they could still feed their families so that then they can get educated so that down the road they're more skilled.
You guys don't necessarily understand it. You take it for granted that your families can afford to have you not working and be going to school because you're consuming electricity and food and clothing and shelter, and you're not necessarily all contributing to paying for that within your family. And there are many places in the world where for you to go on living, you would have to be contributing. So when South Korea improved feeding their people and improved their stock of capital goods, they become one of the nations or one of the world's leading economies after the Korean War. Pretty huge. Okay. Property rights. This one is tremendously important. Tremendously important. Okay. If markets are a good way to organize economic activity, and the price system tells us that we're going to put the money where it needs to be, then we have to protect that money once it's where it needs to be. Exercise authority over the resources you own. Exercise authority over the resources you own. Thanks, this is cool. I like it. I appreciate it. I got a new water bottle. Very cool new water bottle. Got a new phone too.
Buy for your water bottles? Just gonna let
Got a new phone.
You gonna take that?
Exercise
Ow,
your authority
don't
to your
touch my
property,
back.
guys. Exercise your authority.
I
Take
said
it.
it's private property.
Take it back.
Someone take her to jail.
Well, you gotta have government that's willing to enforce property rights, or this stuff has just become mine.
Why don't we enforce our property right ourselves?
You can't.
That's what I get.
That's a significant risk to you.
You have the right
Yeah,
to
when
own
it's
your
just
See,
done.
Braveheart.
guns.
So, if I were able to just go and take Hannah's phone and Delaney's water bottle and Hannah's backpack, if I were able to do that, what are the odds that they would come with those same things again tomorrow? There were no punishment, no repercussion for me for
You
confiscating.
keep doing it.
Would you come with another phone tomorrow?
No.
Would you come with another water bottle? What about on day 4? You'd eventually figure out, I'm not taking anything in there because it all tends to get taken from me.
Delaney just puts poison in your water.
Okay, so take that microscopic example and apply it to the bigger picture. How many of you live somewhere? All of you, right? You all live somewhere, okay.
You live somewhere.
Are there things in the place where you live? You have things, okay. When you left the place where you live this morning,
Yes.
did everyone leave the place where you live? So your things are there alone?
Yes.
So let's imagine that, for all of you, let's imagine that your things are there alone.
Yes.
How certain are you that those things are still going to be there when you go back tonight?
100%.
Yes.
Pretty certain, we all are,
I
right?
don't know about where I live.
Okay. So, can you imagine living in a place where you couldn't be certain that your stuff would still be there when you went back? You wouldn't have as much stuff. Anna just said you wouldn't have as much stuff. Why not?
Yeah, if it gets taken the first time, how are you gonna like?
It would just make this cycle.
I only have as much stuff as I can keep with me. I'd be like Book of Eli. If it doesn't fit in my backpack, it isn't going.
Like who?
The Book of Eli.
Not like a Morgan.
Not Morgan Freeman. Denzel Washington. Great one. Great. All right. So, what about improving and investing in that property? Would I put siding on my house and new roof on it if I thought that vandals were going to come by and
Take your siding off your house.
spray paint the house and maybe start a fire in the yard?
Probably not.
Yeah.
No, that'd be
Isn't that what like insurance is for?
That's what insurance is for, but guess what? Insurance charges you based upon the risk of where you live.
So just super high.
They don't charge everybody a flat rate.
Yes.
Okay? So,
They determine like how much you should pay for it.
property rights encourage me to buy more stuff because I can be assured that my stuff is going to be my stuff. So property rights encourage consumption. Property rights encourage investment. I'm not afraid to improve my home because I know that my home is protected. Does this make sense? Okay. We can be real. There have been some issues with theft from lockers here at school. Your personal property rights still exist here at school. But, if we're completely honest, is there a way to enforce them 100% of the time?
Body cam.
Is it possible for someone in this room to go home today and discover that some of their things are missing from their home? It could happen. It can happen at your home just as much as it can happen here. But what we have is a system that generally ensures the security of your property. And although bad things happen, you feel some confidence in investing and consuming because of that. So now, let's send you on a trip.
We're going to. We're going to Disney World.
You're going to the Ukraine.
Guys, the good vodka.
You're going to Ukraine. You guys understand the political situation going on in Ukraine right now?
Pretty messed up.
Well, the Ukrainians think they own Ukraine, and there are some Russians and some Ukrainians of Russian descent who think that they own Ukraine. And well, there's some debates going on. Crimea is no longer Ukraine; it's now Crimea, which is a pseudo-puppet state of Russia. Okay. If I send you to Ukraine and tell you to start up a business in a city, a border city, Ukrainian and Russian border city.
What would that
Are
be?
you going to be real excited about starting up a business, investing in the capital goods and trading workers and stuff? No, because if more terrorist attacks happen along the border, or if Russia invades, is the property secure? What if your workers flee? Oh, let's be even more concrete, boys and girls. Afghanistan, one of the poorest nations in the world right now, right? Boy, do they need foreign investment. Let's all pool our money. We'll create a little corporation amongst ourselves, and we're going to go and we're going to, let's build a factory in Afghanistan. They need jobs, they need stuff. We'll build a stuff making factory in Afghanistan. Isn't that a great idea?
If only.
Let's build a factory to make stuff in Afghanistan.
Socks.
We're going to get rich.
We make a weapons factory.
What's the problem with our plan?
You don't have protection.
There's no stability.
There's no property right protection because the government's so unstable. the Taliban could come and blow our factory up.
Right.
The Taliban could come and we just get our workers trained and the Taliban comes and chases them off.
Not a fan.
So you hire the mob.
So are you seeing how critically important this can be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we did that exercise at the beginning of this chapter where I said which one of these is the best policy to improve productivity, you remember that one?
Mhm.
And you couldn't decide?
Mhm.
Now that you know more about them, can you decide?
Free condoms still.
Is it
Still free condoms? Alright.
It's not that ignorant.
If I'm in a country that's so corrupt that judges can be bought and sold, what difference does it make if I have a signed contract? Right? If I'm in a country where customs officials are all of the president's brother-in-laws, what difference does it make if I pay and get my stamps, etc.? Okay. If the government of that country changes more frequently than you change your underwear, your property rights are probably not very stable and secure. Did you say every 3 years, Andrew?
You said once a year.
Once a year. Wow. All right.
Frequently.
Frequently. Did you say that's frequently by your standards?
Yeah.
Oh my.
And you're the one with the girlfriend?
Your mama,
I'm so confused.
your mama must be so proud.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've saved money.
So which one do you start with? Do you educate your people? Do you make them healthy? Do you invest? Do you ensure political stability? Do you have to do them all at the same time? Does a chicken have to come before the egg?
What?
Oh no, this confuses me.
Which one has to come first?
I can't tell.
There may not be an answer. It's a great debate, though. It's a fun debate. Okay. Free trade is a huge one, too. If you're all about growing your internal and you want to keep foreign goods out, so you put up high tariff walls, keep those foreign goods out. And we want to keep our people from investing overseas. We want to keep that money inside, so we limit how much they can return in profit from foreign investment. We want to force them to do that. It stifles growth. It stifles growth. You can go the other way and absolutely encourage all kinds of interaction with the world. That encourages a lot of growth. Both have benefits, both have drawbacks. Inward turned countries. China during the closed country policy. Japan, when they shut themselves off from the rest of the world, they ended up way behind. Russia did this, ended up way behind. Got even worse when they became the Soviet Union and closed themselves off behind the Iron Curtain. Argentina, oh my goodness, that was a mess. Countries that engage with the rest of the world, that trade ideas and information and goods and services, end up growing at a faster rate than those that say, no, I'm not talking to you. We know that human intellectual growth happens through stimulation and interaction. Babies who are just abandoned, given up to orphanages, and who just lay in a crib for hours and hours and hours and hours a day and get no stimulation, are developmentally stunted the rest of their lives. Nations that close themselves off and refuse to interact and exchange ideas and goods and services and trade are stunted economically and do not grow as rapidly. Ultimately, the continued growth of productivity is going to come down to technological process. And we have watched this exponential growth since the Industrial Revolution. Knowledge is the basis of technology, because technology is understanding how to do it more efficiently, right? And knowledge is a public good. Everybody gets access to it. It's like the air. There are policies that we can put in place to promote technological progress. Think of one.
Mandatory education.
Patents and copyrights. Protect that innovation
So that
to fuel further innovation. R&D stands for research and development. We're going to stop at the end of this slide and we'll pick up with Hannah's free condoms tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll have a little time for questions and stuff tomorrow. I will open the end of chapter problems today so you can get a run at them, so you can ask questions that you need in class tomorrow. The quiz will be on Friday.
One of the problems Thursday.
They'll be doing tomorrow night.
I did.